Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of K9s Talking Scents. As usual, I'm your host, Cameron Ford, and of course, we're broadcasting out here in Scent City, Las Vegas. So, on today's episode, I have a friend who I have known for, 20 plus years now. And back when I was a little 20-something-year-old trying to start off my career, this guest he had written a book. He has now since then written multiple books. He's an author, subject matter expert, former police officer, runs one of the biggest canine software companies out there that tracks data for law enforcement. Without taking up any more, letting you explain it even further, Bob Eden, welcome to K9s Talking Scents.
Thanks, Cameron.
So obviously there's going to be a segment of my audience that has not heard from you or knows who you are. There's another set of the audience that very much knows you. And then I think there's like the ones in the middle, the law enforcement officers that are probably either just starting their career or they're 4 or 5 years into it. So a little bit for everybody. Tell us about you, what you've done, and then what you actually do or spend most of your time doing today.
So my career started out back in the 80s. I started off as a police officer for the Delta Police Department, and which is in British Columbia. And during that period of time, when we first started, we didn't have a dog unit. So I ended up starting the dog unit for Delta. But I actually didn't even get into the program when I first started. I put in the information that we were required to go to council with to be able to develop a canine unit, and I was still basically only 2 years into my career. So at that point in time, they hired 4 of the guys and put them on the job. About 2 years later, I did get into the unit, and that's what started my career as far as formal policing career with police dogs. I worked with Delta for a number of years. I ended up becoming a trainer after going to numerous other courses outside of my own hook, which I know a lot of officers are very familiar with, having to pay their own way. It isn't a new thing by any stretch of the imagination. And from there, I worked until 1991, at which point in time I started off a business because I felt that the things that I was going to didn't provide, I think, what was needed out there. I was looking for some scenario-based training that was non-political, and it was very difficult to get that. As you know, a lot of the training is very, very politically motivated, depending on, who's doing the training and what style they have. So at that point in time, I started something called the International Police Canine Conference. We ran that conference for 20 years. Yeah. And that's how you and I met. When we came down, we did one in, was it Lake County?
Yep.
Down in that area.
Yep.
And you were kind enough to help us out there when you had your kennel facility there. And that's how we began our friendship.
Yeah.
It went for 20 years. We ran over 4,000 dogs through that program, and it was a hands-on program where you actually came and you did foundational training in the morning, and in the afternoon you took lecture material, and then in the evenings we did scenario-based training. So it was very intense. You'd start off at 8 o'clock in the morning, and we would work you through right through sometimes until midnight every night, Monday through Thursday, and then on the Friday we'd be done by about 1 in the afternoon. And it became kind of a mainstay for a lot of police agencies. We introduced muzzle work very early back in the 90s, back and then when it was almost unheard of over North America. And it kind of grew exponentially as we continue to introduce it in our conferences. The instructors that I had were all handpicked. They weren't people that applied to come and work with me. They were people that I saw that I felt, based on their expertise, the fact that they had a sincere desire to help others, that was important to me. Then the other part of it was that they checked their egos at the door. That was important as well. They had to have a sincere desire to help the handlers out there, and the team was dedicated. And over a period of time, we ended up having about 18 steady people that had trainers that had worked with me during that period of time that stayed almost that entire time. A very, very good team, and it became well known. During that same period of time, back in 91, that's when I also had a program or a programming firm start up cats for me. And the reason why I did that is because computers were just starting to come into vogue. at the time, even though I was out of British Columbia, I was a member of the Washington State Police Canine Association, and they were into maintaining written logs back in those days. And we just did it in a scribbler. So at that point in time, I tried to have somebody develop it for me. It was something that I started to share around with others until it got me to the point where it needed to be improved upon. And over and over again, we just kept developing it. And it ended up becoming a business. And that's how CATS basically started. And it was named CATS for Canine Activity Tracking System. And that's kind of the background. I did my first book in 1984, but did my second book. That was Dog Training for Law Enforcement. I did my second book in 1994, I believe. It's K9 Officers Manual. And then in November of this past year, December actually, it was released, was K9 Supervisors Manual, which has just come out.
Yeah. And that was, I mean, a very, diverse career, from, being author to canine handler. You did a lot of this while you were working the job. You were still a full-time police officer for a lot of this. And it gave you I think a lot better understanding of what was going on in law enforcement. And you were able to help out with, it was obviously before social media and before things like podcasts and these other things. You did it in books, which is our main way of communicating. That's how I first ever saw you, was from the Police Canine Manual, the Canine Handlers Manual.
Right. The frustrating part for me when I first got started is I went looking for resources and there weren't any.
Yeah.
I think at the time there was only one book. And then the other thing was, when I tried to get my department to come on board to develop properly, and I would go to other agencies and seeing how they were run. And I was one of these guys that was building my own car and selling T-shirts at events to raise money and so on and so forth. I could never understand that concept. It just, to this day, I don't understand why we aren't properly budgeting for canine units.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the biggest problems that we have even today, is getting proper budgeting for canine units. And so I was frustrated, and that's actually what pushed me, even though, to be quite frank, Cameron, I don't think I was in a proper position to actually write a book when I wrote my first book. I don't think I had the proper experience. What I did have was a lot of frustration built up, and I wanted to put out whatever information I could possibly gather and put it on paper and put it in a format that might help somebody else that was like me, who had been trying to locate something to guide them and help them along in starting a new unit. And there wasn't anything out there. Once I got the book done, that apparently, from feedback that I got subsequent to that, and even to this day, I get people that approach me and say, hey, we started our unit based on and did our training based on your book. And yet, shortly after I got the first book done, I changed my whole concept of training from what I had learned to kind of routine. And I asked the publisher not to continue publishing it. That was Dog Training for Law Enforcement, because I had gone from one style totally into a more operant conditioning type of style and self-discovery type style of training that I felt was more effective. And I didn't want people to have the old information that was, in my opinion, a lot of it was very compulsive. Sure. So I changed my style, and that's the downside of books. You can't just sort of update it real quick and get the new version out, right?
Yep.
So it's been a long process, and very much a learning process for me. And to this day, I'm still learning. It just never stops.
No, it never stops. And that's, obviously a passion you and I share. That's what one of the main things that we always hit it off, is because we both love learning, and we both have really watched each other change over these years, and going through applying new, like you said, we knew what we thought what was the way back then, and then went, oh, wait, this is different. But I think where, again, our common ground was, we were always willing to change and try something different.
Be open, be open-minded. Yeah.
Versus well, it's not broken, I'm going to keep doing it this way, which was, hey, some people, they may not need to, because they're only working a certain type of dog, or they select for exactly what they're looking for. But in the position that you and I have both been in, especially, that's the other thing I'm going to bring up is you were the OG of K9 conferences. The International K9 Conference was like the first one where law enforcement could get together, do training, get lots of good education in that format. Up until that point, it really didn't happen. It might have been like more locally, but you guys put the show on the road. You guys went to many different cities, put on lots, like you said, lots of lectures, but tons of hands-on. I mean, so many K9 teams, even I come across today, still do some of those scenarios that initially started with you guys back in the day, back in the early 2000s, traveling around, United States and Canada doing those conferences. And what's funny is, as things have changed, the conferences now are less about working the dog and more about just informational sharing. There was so much logistics involved in what you guys had helicopters, ranges, you guys had to get buildings. So I understand why, the conferences that are out there these days are like, what, we just do it at a nice hotel, ballrooms, conference rooms. All we got to do is just do this, have a number of instructors. They do their little 2-hour formats, and it's not about the dog training. But I think we're missing, I don't know. I mean, I guess our industry has changed enough, because obviously there are plenty of seminars where the dogs get worked, but not at the same way or level that you guys did it. And that's the part I'm trying to say I miss the fact that you'd have a big conference like exists today, but you'd also be able to work your dog. Now, you can't do like a hit style conference and have 1,300 K9 handlers there all working dogs. That'll never happen. You guys would what was the numbers that you guys would do at those days? How many dog teams would you guys do?
We tried to do a minimum of 60. We did some that were a little bit less than that at times, but usually a minimum of 60 would get us through so that I could at least pay the bills at that point. But we had conferences that went up to 120, 130 dog teams.
Wow.
And that's getting up there as far as, especially when I've only got the 18 instructors. We would boost it up with ad hoc instructors that would come in and assist us at times. I had a group of people that I could call on. However, our main core number of people that we had in the conference itself that were trainers, they're what made it work. I mean, I just coordinated it and put it together and developed the template for it, what I wanted taught. But it was the team members that really made it work, Cameron. It really was. Those guys were phenomenal. A number of them, the vast majority of them, had been in some sort of a lethal confrontation while deploying a dog at some point in time. So the instructors that I had and that I handpicked, along with everything else, were people of experience, both male and female, that we had that came on to teach for us. And they had been there, done that. So they were teaching not just theory and informational type information they're trying to spew out. They were good at what they were doing as far as foundational training is concerned, but they were also very good when it came to tactics and scenario-based training. And that's what I wanted. I wanted it to be well-rounded. The goal was for these handlers to go home at the end of shift. Regardless of what they run into, we want them to think their way through. We want them to make good deployment decisions, and we want them to go home to their families. And that's basically what it was all about.
Yeah. And it was funny because I remember I think it was the second time you guys came out, but it was after 9/11. It was like a good year or two after 9/11. And I had gotten some hotels for you guys to train in and some other stuff. And then Bob Wright was doing the bomb dogs. And he sets up, it was my first time seeing it, the NORT, or the odor recognition test that the ATF does. And he sets that up, and myself and all the bomb dog teams in the area at the time, because of course, after 9/11, there was a lot more bomb dogs, and it was all of our first time training that. And man, did we hate that day, that test, that evaluation, doing the NORT, because the dogs hadn't seen that before. They hadn't been exposed to that. And though the dogs would find explosives in, I would say, your typical kind of scenario, it was super enlightening to see something as basic as an odor recognition test take the dogs off the rails because they just hadn't been exposed to it. But within a day or two, exposing the dogs to that, no problem. And it's so funny because that's back in, I'm going to say, let's just say '02. Here we are today, 20 years later, and odor recognition testing for drug dogs scares the shit out of them. But it's such a valuable thing. So I relate and understand to why some of the drug dog handlers like lose their mind when you tell them that an ORT could be part of a certification process coming up. But I'll let you kind of talk about, how you guys, brought detection into the conferences, and then what's your feelings on odor recognition testing for basically any discipline in law enforcement that's required to go out and keep records and testify and things like that.
You know what? Initially we started off as patrol only. Yep. And then as time went on, we got into bringing in the explosives dogs and then also narcotics dogs. And that was left up to those who I felt were very secure in what they were doing with that. Mm-hmm. People like you mentioned, Bob Wright, for example. And one thing about Bob is that he could be creative.
Yeah.
Bob is one of the best trainers I have ever come across in my lifetime. Mm-hmm. And he's extremely detailed. He's extremely creative, and he's extremely practical. He's an awesome teacher. He knows how to put the information across. Yeah. As far as ORT is concerned, odor recognition testing, that type of thing, not just ORT, but any type of varied testing that you could do that introduces something that is challenging and unique is going to bring talent forward that you might not think that you've had the ability to do in the past. It's going to teach you things that you may not have learned in the past. It's going to teach the dogs things that they may not have run into in the past. Anything that you can do to challenge a team is going to move you forward. I think too often, Cameron, we get caught in a rut. Mm-hmm. We'll do the same thing in training over and over again. I've seen training where you go to the training events. What do you want to do? I don't know. What do you want to do? And the lawn chairs come out and the patients are paid and away we go, right? Okay. Yep. But when you go into something and somebody throws something that's unique and new into it, the more that you can do that way, the more challenging that you can be. It's okay to fail as long as you learn from that failure and you figure out what you need to do to change it, make it better, and you go and you attack it from that angle. So yep. I think it's beneficial. The more challenges that you put into it, the more beneficial it's going to be.
For sure. I mean, and this will bring us into a lot of the records keeping part of it, but like you said, we get into ruts, and just like you mentioned, so much of detection training, we both know a lot of the handlers on the professional side love the sexy bite work. It's also not just about the sexiness. It's also about the life-saving aspects of it, dealing with stress, the dog dealing with stress, handlers stress, making good decisions. All of this is extremely important. It gets lots of well-deserved time, but I do feel the scales kind of get out of balance because a lot of the litigation, the numbers of litigation cases are in relation to detection. High liability and bites and all that stuff is obviously growing, but it's a very separate thing. In detection, though, especially with Fourth Amendment aspects, there has to be the needle hadn't moved a whole lot in a number of years. As you remember, and I bring this up from time to time on the podcast, the old mentality was we'd walk in with that 4-inch binder, put it on the table, give it to that defense attorney and say, hey, here you go. Have fun reading all my records, knowing that they really wouldn't. That has changed because now things are, like you said, between your programs and the others that are out there, it's digitized now. It's much easier to consume this data, much easier to look at certain things or cue certain data points. So that aspect has changed, which means what we should be doing in training and evaluation should also look at changing. Now, you, like me, we both sit on ASB, the K9s, Canine and Sensor Committee, and these things get brought up, data collection, procedures, things like that. Odor recognition testing is a very basic form of an evaluation. Can the dog sniff multiple of the same objects, whether it be paint cans, glass jars, small metal boxes, whatever it is, and say yes or no, does odor exist at this particular one, and working its way down until it finds whatever trained odor and indicates according to whatever the handler trained the dog to do. That's basic. And then evaluations have to look at the operational aspect. So you have, on the one hand, a baseline. Does the dog know the odor? Yes or no? Okay, that's what an ORT really does well. The next part of a certification should be looking at how does this team operate in conditions that basically simulate or match what they're trained to deploy in. What's your feelings on that? And, because we still see today a vast majority of the national level certifications do the same thing they've done since the early 90s or mid 90s.
Okay. So
there's a lot to unpack there.
You can take so many directions. You're like an attorney on the stand. Which question do you want me to answer first, right?
Yeah.
So when it comes to, you've always got to maintain your foundation. That too often we go and we do sort of scenario-based training, but it's always very much similar, and it never really seems to change up that much. Mm-hmm. But then we have a tendency, and it's both on the patrol side as well as on the detection side, but we have a tendency to get away from just going back to basics and doing the foundation work. The very, very foundation work should continue to be done over and over and over again, so that stays strong in the dog. If you have a strong foundation, everything else will start to fall into place very easily. But once that foundation starts to fall apart, it doesn't matter how much scenario-based training that you do, it's not going to follow through with the same quality as it is if you're keeping that foundation strong. So for me, foundation building is very strong. The other thing is, when you get into scenario-based training, again, it's about challenging. If you're doing the same thing over and over again and you're not changing, you're getting into a routine where you're not allowing the dog or the handler, for that matter, you're not challenging the dog or the handler with enough variety. So when they get into something that's a little unusual or a little bit more difficult, they're not quite sure how to handle that situation. So for me, the more diversity, more variety, and the more challenging events that you can do in any type of training that you have is going to better prepare you for what you deploy in. The other thing is that I would venture to say that in some cases, some training takes place and it's very similar. It's going over suitcases, or it's in a down lockers in a school, and so on and so forth. And it's pretty much the same thing all the way along, but those same dogs might be working out at an airport where there's a lot of crowds around them, that type of routine, and they don't get much of an opportunity to work where there's a lot of people around, a lot of distractions, that type of thing, that are outside of the control of the handler. And we need to be able to make arrangements to go to places that allow us the opportunity to train in more real life type situations. And it's much better for the dog and for the handler to be able to work through those kinds of issues. And I think in a lot of cases we're lax on doing those types of things.
Do you think certifications need to change or face some updating from where we've been at and where we're at today?
I think, yes. I think that certifications constantly need to be looked at because the industry is changing. Mm-hmm. And as such, as the industry changes, you've got to go back and you've got to look at, okay, what have we got for certification now? What should we change to make it better? What are we doing now that we weren't doing before that we can relate to by getting a certification that relates more to what we're doing nowadays? And where are we going with it? It's not going to stop. It's going to continue to evolve. And so certifications need to evolve as well, depending on what orders you're adding into the fray, what kind of conditions that you're training in. Certifications, quite often, it's kind of cookie cutter. How often do you do a certification, for example, in an actual airport? I don't know how often that takes place, but where you've got people around and so on and so forth. It's usually done in a more, in the ones that I've seen, in a more clean environment. And you can have other people around and so on and so forth, but it's not in the real life based type of situation. And I'd like to see a lot more of that type of thing included in the certifications. I really would.
Yeah, I mean, you're bringing up the same things I talk about quite a bit, which is it needs to match better what we do and it not be so cookie cutter. And
Absolutely.
But the culture right now is back to that part about failure. We're so afraid of, well, if we make it too difficult, what happens? You know? And go ahead.
Well, okay. So I have seen over my years certifications developed by new associations that come up and so on and so forth, where they develop a fairly easy certification standard so that it's easier for the dogs to pass through that standard. And that's not what this job is all about. And I'm not saying you have to have something that's so difficult that it makes it that difficult for the dogs to overcome whatever the challenge is. But you want to have something that is distinctly viable from the perspective of it meets what the dog will meet on the street realistically in that particular dog's form of service. So if he's a dog working in an airport, that's maybe where those certifications should take place. If it's a dog that's working exclusively in schools, then maybe there. If he's working both, then maybe part of the certification needs to take place in both. But these cookie cutter type routines, they don't, all they do is they check off a few little boxes. And you have to keep in mind that no matter what we do, especially, but it's more so with the cookie cutter type certifications, I think, Cameron, all it is it's a certification that shows how that dog performed for that moment in time only. It's not necessarily an indicator of how that dog performs over a long period of time or consistently. It's only, did he do well on that particular day? And this is where the records come in to back up the dog. You want to have a training objective in your records, and then you want to be able to record how that dog performs, so that gives the consistency, the background of how the dog performs consistently over a period of time that backs up that certification. And that's where I think a lot of people don't understand that. And I want to get into something specific about that, Carmen, just a little bit, because I think it's important. And that's that we've had cases, one in Utah that I can think of, and there's others, one that occurred up here in Canada, where when they do record keeping, and with the CAT system, we have the ability to not only do the drop down boxes, but you can add in, your descriptions and so on and so forth. And I'm sure other systems have the same thing. If you're a handler out there doing records, don't do it cheaply. In other words, make sure that you document things like changes of behavior. Don't just put down that the dog committed a final, because we've lost cases. One that I can think of in British Columbia with an RCMP team that went out, got a very good hit on a van, ended up picking off a fairly decent arrest out of it with a load that was on there. But it was thrown out of court because the officer talked always and had recorded only about the finals being a sit by his dog. And there was never any explanation about the fact that I recognized that there's a change of behavior in the dog indicating a presence of illicit narcotics or whatever terminology that they want to use. All they ever talked about was the final set by the dog. If that's all that's ever recorded as showing a positive indicator for narcotics, when you're doing a drug search, for example, and it goes to court, and your dog is obviously giving you all the indicators, change of behavior, there's narcotics there, but for some reason he didn't do the sit. And the one in BC, the reason they gave there was that the vehicle was up tight against an elevated curb on the side of the highway, and there wasn't enough room for the dog to actually, where he got the hit, wasn't enough room for him. So he sort of stood there in between the van and where the curbing was, and never actually sat, and they threw it out. It's those types of things that we need to be cognizant of, and don't be lazy when you're doing your record keeping. It's a matter of maintaining as much information that you can, because that is going to go to your benefit when it comes to court time.
I totally remember that case. That case was, it even made it popular over here in the United States. There's a lot of teams that were panicking because of that ruling, even though it was in Canada. Were there going to be attorneys in the United States that took that approach about the final response? Did the dog go to it or not? And all of that kind of stuff. It's a really important conversation. You kind of hit on this. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about, what are you writing in records in regards to indication? What have you seen as a trend, as a person who has access to this kind of data? And what, if any, crossover to the legal side, let's say in the US, have you seen with some of this information that's looked at on records keeping?
Well, most of the record keeping that we do or that we maintain are for American law enforcement anyway. We have very few actually Canadian clients. The level of, or the number of law enforcement agencies here in Canada doesn't come anywhere near what you have down in the United States. So that's a big thing. What I see is a lot of situations where some handlers will just basically use the drop downs. They got an indication that that's fine, they're done with that. It was a hit or miss, that hit or miss. But then they don't go back and they don't put any comments in where the handler's comments are available for them within the system. And there's so many different avenues of thought. One avenue of thought, of course, that a lot of these handlers adhere to, and it's dangerous in my opinion, is that the less that you put down, the less you're giving away to the defense when it comes time for court. But think logically of all this, and this is what's happening. It becomes a he says, she says kind of routine. It's one of those things where if I don't have it logged down, that I understand a change of behavior in my dog, that it was very apparent to me that my dog got a change of behavior that indicated illicit narcotics on the vehicle, and as a result, I searched that vehicle and obtained drugs. It doesn't necessarily mean that dog has to have a sit and to be a final. If that dog does do a sit as a final, that's fine. We train for that, and that's what we prefer to have. It's a distinctive, very distinctive indicator, but it doesn't mean that I don't understand what my dog is doing when I watch that behavior change. I know there's narcotics in that vehicle when I see that behavior change. So why don't I describe that in my comments when I'm recording it? And once it's there, then I can say, yeah, this is what I saw, this is what I observed, this is why I searched the vehicle. The judge says, let me see your records, and they want to go through the records. Yep, he's described this before, and it's pure evidence that the officer understands what his dog is doing, and it's very clear to the officer that there's narcotics there. So if you don't have that documented down, you've got nothing to back yourself up. Mm-hmm. And that's basically it in a nutshell. If it's not written down, it's not there. And I've had a couple of occasions where people have subscribed to our system and well into having it for 2 or 3 years. And this is important to note as well. I'll get a phone call from a supervisor say, Bob, your system isn't working. And I'll say, what's the problem? They said, you know what, we've had the system for a number of years, and I just got hit with a subpoena, and I need to provide this documentation. It's on a dog bite case, for example, and our system maintains bite demographics. It goes by race. It breaks it all down for them. It tells all the details. You got use of force that is canine specific in there. There's so much that it can provide. And yet he's spitting out reports that are coming up subject arrested, and this is his name, and that's it. But I can't seem to get the details out of it. Okay, well, let's go have a look. So we go and we bring up the actual file and find out that the officer hasn't put any details in either the training side or on the incident side that much, because they're going by this routine where maybe their trainer has advised them, don't put in too much information, you're going to give too much away. And it's not that the system isn't working, it's working. It's that the handlers are not putting in the information and they're leaving themselves hanging. And the sad part about it is that not only is it the handler responsibility, and it's probably, in my opinion, I think the trainers are giving them bad guidance in that regard, but it's also the supervisor's responsibility to check those records. They should be reading these files. We have the ability in the system to submit every file to the supervisor for scrutiny and for him to lock it down. And if it's not done right, he should be bouncing it back. So it's not just handler responsibility. It goes to trainer, and it also goes to supervisor as well.
Yeah, you bring up a major one, and I see it a lot still today, which is don't put too much in your records for the exact same thing that you said, which was, oh, if you put that information in your records, they'll use that against you. In this day and age, when the public and of course media does not trust law enforcement at all, being as transparent as possible is critical to help rebuild that trust
Absolutely.
in the not just in law enforcement, but then in the use of the dogs. I mean, these are dogs that affect people's right, of being seized. And to be less than transparent or to omit bits of information is a downside, and we have to get better about that. Um, so many handlers I get a lot of times too when I'm at these events and doing seminars. Well, I don't want to put that in my records because we ended the session and my dog found it, but your dog missed it, and we did corrective action, and this is how it ended. You got to put all of that information in there. Don't be afraid to put a miss. Don't be afraid to put in, whatever term you want to call it, false alert, non-productive response, all the different versions that are out there that people use. Whatever you use, stick with that. But we have to document this. Everybody clearly understands there is no perfect dog and there is no perfect handler. So stop trying to make it look like we're perfect. That's another one of those issues that we have, is when we do these records and we keep these records, looking like the dog is at 95% accurate. Every dog handler trainer out there can easily tell you a dog is not that good. That just basically means in training, if you're that good in training, you're just not challenging yourself hard enough. Obviously, the real world, we can't collect that same kind of data, but because you don't know what you miss, and you don't know if you also, what you found is maybe just part of what was there. There's so many variables, which is why the court cases have all said you can't use the deployment history as the barometer for the accuracy and proficiency of the K9 team, like the records are, which is super important for the record keeping, but also why it's super important that we're honest about what our dogs are doing and what we're doing. Because many times it falls on the handler when we have an error that happens in training. It's most times falls back to the handler. So why not be honest about this? What did we do? What did we cause? How did this happen? Because, like we said, there's a U.S. Supreme Court case that clearly lays that out, that the records are very important, or the most important thing for the evaluation of the credibility of the K9 team.
And that came as a result of those records being submitted and the lower court not understanding Florida, the true value of it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The irony there is I trained that dog, Aldo. Aldo came from me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was the original certifying official on Aldo, myself and Matt Gibbs, and that dog then got switched to another agency probably a few hundred miles away, and that's where the case derived from. So, of course, we got called way back in the day about this case, about the certification, about the training, but we had nothing to do with once the dog was handed off to this other agency within that first year, because that's when they didn't recertify with that dog. So the only documented certification was the one that we had done with the previous handler, and they hadn't done it with that current team. In any case, the training records and the things that we had supplied, especially for me back then as the vendor, at least established the dog knew what it was doing, and it was proficient in that aspect. But like you said, the Florida courts, though, misinterpreted some of those legal aspects. But again, having good records documenting both all the good things and the things that don't go so well is critical. Again, especially in today's day and age, super critical that we cover this and we are transparent about how the performance of the team is.
It's okay to fail.
Yes.
Yeah, it's okay to fail and document it.
Yes.
And then the steps, that's what we've got, corrective training in the system.
Mm-hmm.
What corrective training steps are we going to take? You log it down. Yep. Recheck the dog. The dog's now doing good. Boom. All those things are there. They love it. It never creates a problem. What creates a problem is when all of a sudden everything's just perfect all the way along, and it's just one or two lines or maybe no lines at all. Mm-hmm. So you've got nothing to back you up. Mm-hmm. And then your credibility comes into question.
Yep. And again, hopefully people become more comfortable with this idea on that. Now, obviously, we've been doing detection dog work for a number of years. How have you seen detection dog training and or just detection dog work in general has changed in the time that you've been doing this?
Oh my word. Man. It's changed exponentially. I can remember years ago when I went down and developed the explosives dog program for the federal police in Brazil. They'd never had any explosive dogs, and they were prepping for the 2007 Pan American Games, and we were using scent boxes basically with open backs so we could reach in and reward the dog by tucking a ball underneath. There was no such thing as ball poppers and all the rest of the equipment that we use now. The types of equipment that we like your TADS devices that you can put narcotics in now to put them in different areas. You can submerge them in water and still get the odor through it. It's incredible how much has changed. The downside of that is that it's also provided a lot more scientific aspect of things as far as the narcotics or any kind of detection work is concerned. So it makes it that much more onerous and responsibility going to the handlers to understand what they're doing and be able to describe it and explain it when it comes to court cases. And that can be its own basically albatross as well if we don't know what we're dealing with a lot of times. We can get into fancy names and all sorts of stuff, but if we can't explain what it's all about, all those fancy names don't help us. So it's a matter of, as we grow, we have to make sure that we stay on top of things. We still try to keep the explanations as simple as we possibly can so they're understandable to the layman. That makes it easier for court. But it doesn't mean that we slow down our progression. We've got to keep on going and continue to improve in what we're doing. But it's been exponential from the days that I started.
Yeah, and you brought up another point too, which was us being good at describing when our dogs are smelling things that are not target. What does our dog do when it smells other animal smells or food or distractors and so on and so forth? And those things were never documented, until recently. We never wrote down also how many blank areas we searched. And now that's becoming extremely important, doing the documenting searches that contain no odor.
That has become a standard with record keeping nowadays. I've seen that probably in especially about the last 5 years, Cameron. It's become just a standard thing, and with officers recording their information in the system, and very valuable for them. It's necessary, and it's nice to see that they're starting to implement that. That's got to come from good training, whoever they're getting trained from, and when it comes to documentation, they're being taught what to document, and that makes a difference.
Yeah. It's important that if we can show the machine works, we also have to show the machine works with the lack of a target present. And that was never documented. We never used to go, oh, okay, I ran an unknown blank area, and now I want to show this in records that I ran an area unknown to me. It actually contained no odor, and I was successful in calling that. We never wrote that stuff down back when I was first doing this. We didn't even write down the blank vehicles or the blank rooms. We just wrote down what we found, and that was it.
Well, it's the same thing back in the day with tracking, going to patrol dogs. We designed the track so the dog was successful every time. We were told to log the fact that the dog was 100% successful. Back in the day, that's what the expectation was, and that's what was taught. We know now that that's not correct. We know that dogs don't always have successes on every single track. And there's a reason why, and we need to improve on that. So by documenting that and then showing the steps taken to improve it, basically we're getting the job done properly now, and it's being accepted better in the court system.
Now, I'm not going to get you deep in the weeds on the synthetic versus real argument, but what have you seen? I mean, because that was also something that's new for us. I did a video recently where I just talked about, not going in any brands or anything like that. I just talked about the importance of whatever we use, we need to test it. We need to know that it meets some sort of independent evaluation. Every chemist I've talked to says, synthetics are something that will definitely and can work, but where we're at today, there's not enough consistency in that answer, and there's not enough information that can be articulated properly if it ever were challenged in the legal side of things of how it works and why it works. What have you seen, I would say, more in the data collection or just in general, what you've come across as a company that, tracks this kind of information?
Well, first of all, I don't go into a lot of it, to be honest with you, Cameron. I'm only in the system because the data belongs to the end client. So unless they need help, I'm not usually in the system. I don't go through it and look at it. It's really none of my business kind of routine. And I make a point of making sure that I'm maintaining my integrity when it comes to that part of it. Having said that, on some that I've seen, I see very few. I shouldn't say very few. I see fewer that use synthetic than use real product. But I also hear of complaints where it's difficult for some to get real product.
Sure.
But no matter what you do, the fact of the matter is, no matter what you do, the real product is the real product, and that's what you're going to run into on the street, and it's going to have other things in it that you're going to have to work with. Even dope is going to be different from one part of the country, even the one part of a state to another. It could be formulated a little bit differently. It's a dog's breakfast, really, no pun intended, when it comes to that type of thing. I recently wrote up the policy and the standards and the for the Canadian embassies up here. My choice, and I'm not, and it's important for me to say this, and it's probably because I'm not fully trusting yet, and it's probably because I'm not educated enough yet, but my choice was for the Canadian government in their embassies not to do any training or testing using any form of synthetic material for their explosives dogs, because this is what it was for. I think we've got 138 embassies around the world from Canada, and my policy when I wrote it for them, when I developed it for them, was only to use real product in their training. I felt most secure with that. I can't, and like I said, I can't really speak to what the trend is because I've never gone through our system to try to determine that. So it's not an answer or a question that I could answer legitimately for you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you bring up very good points, which is, of course, we need to test and train with what we are expected to find. So that's a major part of that answer and to look at. The other thing is, back to the points of the chemists who I've been around, due to the inconsistency nature of all the different potential products out there. That's another thing is, but with all of that said, and this is the same thing I said on my video that I had posted on the synthetic versus real arguments, where nothing's perfect. That's for sure.
That's correct.
All of these different things, whether it be the odor imprint aids, or the odor absorbed aids, whether it be they call them imprint pads, to synthetics, to real, all of these things can have a place. It's like a puzzle. Each little puzzle piece works, and it'll fit into each other. But when you're going to get to your testing, and of course your operational, you and your dog better have significant education and experience in relation to the type of target you're looking for, whatever that is.
Totally agree. I think if you're training a lot on synthetic, you've also got to, my thing, what I would want to make sure that whatever we're training for on synthetic, I would want to be training for on the real thing, and I would want to be testing on the real thing. I wouldn't necessarily want to be testing on synthetic. The dogs are used to that. If it's got a very finite, narrow factor as far as detection is concerned, as far as the odor is concerned, there might be a little bit more latitude on the explosive side of it, on the real side of it. and the dog needs to be able to determine that on the real side of it. So I'd like to see if they're going to use both. I'd like to make sure that the actual testing or certification is done on what they would actually run into on the street, not necessarily something that they've been trained on a consistent basis. I'm not sure if that makes sense the way I explain it, but that's what would make me feel comfortable.
Sure. Another good, so we've talked about these different data points so far. One is, the evaluation slash, how the teams are being looked at. The next one is training in the aspects of what you're training on. Another one is, like we talked about, the blanks and things like that. Then we talked about the percentage of accuracy of the dog teams and not being afraid to, write down our errors. Another interesting point to go into is search time. Again, I know, like you said, you don't go looking into records or anything like that, but it was funny. I just talked about this on a Q&A, and I was talking about how the average search time, if you were to poll 100 handlers of all different types of disciplines, and you looked if they had records and you looked at those records, the average search time from the dog starting the search to finding its first odor would be 3 minutes or less. Have you, just from your own experience in years of doing this, have you seen a similar trend? But what I was highlighting is, by having records, it shows you this. You don't have to go out and poll people. By looking at records and the documentation, you can be like, holy cow, you know what? My average search time before I find something is only like 3 minutes, but my type of detection I do, vast majority of the search time is going to be, let's say, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour. How often am I doing that? That's just, like I said, I want to bring it as a topic for you to kind of elaborate on, or your experience and what you've seen.
So a lot of that, those short-term time frames, like you talk about under 3 minutes, a lot of that probably relates in large part to what you're searching, Cameron. So, for example, a lot of it is vehicles. I mean, the vast majority of searches guys are doing are vehicles. It doesn't take long to run a dog around a vehicle, so your search time is not going to be very lengthy. So I think a lot of it depends on what it is that you're searching. Having said that, a dog needs to have the ability to do prolonged searches, 20, 25, 30 minutes kind of routine before pooping out, if at all possible. You might need to take a break in between, give them a break depending on how intense the dog is working. If you're trying to clear a stadium, for example, you're not gonna do that in 3 minutes. It just isn't gonna happen. No. And you're gonna need multiple dog teams, and you're gonna need some time to get the job done. So it's a hard question to answer because it depends. The subject matter is so varied with what it is that you're searching. It would be entirely dependent on what the actual application of the dog is.
Absolutely. And that's a huge point. And I was going to add another reason why sometimes when you look at that data and it's a very quick find is because if a lot of their data had so many reps because they were doing fundamentals where, let's say it's searching, containers or boxes or a small room, like you said, or vehicles, whatever it is. And the average search, is going to be low. So that's going to skew your number, because if you do 25 of those searches that are at that type and you only do 2 or 3 of those longer searches, your numbers are going to be off. So an important thing that we always have to consider as I bring that point forward was, well, what is it that they're searching? The discipline, like you brought up, that they're in. But despite those things, collecting that data will help us go, I haven't really done X, whatever that is. In this case, we're talking about search time. How much search time have I put my dog in to see how it performs if the search is 10 minutes long? Because one of the things that I know many handlers and trainers see is a dog's internal clock, as they're searching, as that time goes past that 3 minutes or whatever that typical, we're just using 3 minutes as an arbitrary number here. As they go past that time, dogs begin to think something's broken. Well, I don't know, why haven't I found this yet? What is going on? I have an issue, and then we see abnormal behaviors. We see dogs doing things. It's like you putting in the dollar into the Coke machine and nothing comes out. which if you're willing to put a second one in and nothing comes out, what's your next one? An emotional response. You're shaking the machine. You're doing something. You're doing whatever you can to get that item out. So a dog who goes beyond its normal search time because we haven't done a good enough job to build out that duration. It's important to see that because it's critical to learn this in training through that record keeping than it is to find it out on a real search.
And you're bang on, because they are masters when it comes to understanding what's going on around them. Not only body language, you talk about that internal clock. Mm-hmm. We even used to use that in the old days when it came to bite work. We wanted to get the dog to come off a bite. We'd give them a count of 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, and then the correction comes when we call the out, and it would be timed. So the dog knows that over that period of time, oh, something's coming, so I'm going to let go. And you get those dogs now would be popping off before you wanted them to pop off. So, and it's the same concept. It's exactly the same concept. They do get, if you're doing the same routine over and over again, and it's always the same, you're going to get that clock built in there. So if you don't do anything more than 5 minutes on a session, if you're not doing 20 minutes or 25 minutes or picking it off every once in a while in 2 minutes, and having that variety there, your dog is going to set a certain point in time where, okay, I give up. I've had enough. There's no fun coming, so I'm not going to continue this. So it's a very, very important aspect of detection work.
And it's super, like I said, it's just important that we collect this information. When handlers, I'll bring up search and rescue at the moment because in the law enforcement world, record keeping is considered normal. You have to do it. As I've traveled in the search and rescue community, some are really good. They keep great records and things like that. And then there's others that keep no records. What has Kat seen? Has that been an emerging area has search and rescue grown in record keeping? What have you seen in relation to that community?
Yeah, search and rescue. We've got a number of search and rescue groups that are in the system now, and they're putting their tracks in and so on and so forth. When they're doing searches, they're maintaining records, and sometimes better records than some of the canine handlers for law enforcement do, simply because I think they're very dedicated to what they do. They have a strong desire. They are doing things out of their own pocket. There's just a very different type of attitude a lot of times with some of the SAR teams. Yeah. And it's kind of a pleasant thing to see when you get in there and you see in the system that are using it properly. I want to go back just a little bit. I was going to mention too, sometimes we have clients that contact us, and we have 2 sets of timetables that are built into the CATS system. And you talk about time and that type of routine. When somebody does an event within the CATS system, we have what we call a training session, which is when you're going to train, say, from noon until, say, 1,800 hours. So you're going to get that period of time of training in, and you're going to be able to do 2 or 3 narcotic searches and maybe building search or whatever it is that you're doing, or maybe it's just straight detection work. But in each one of those, there's a training activity. So you might, during those hours of time, you're going to put down a training activity, narcotics training activity, and you're going to have all your stuff listed and so on and so forth. With each activity, the system, by double clicking on a calendar, it puts in the time and date, the time that the problem is set, and the time that the problem is started, and the time that the problem ends. So it's very easily, and the system puts out reports that show you exactly what kind of time is spent on what we refer to as nose time only. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the handlers want to find ways around that, and you can turn it off in our system if you want, because we just had so many people calling and said, look, it's getting in the way. We don't want to. They can still put the times in, but the system will also check to see if the times are correct. In other words, if you've got the start time after the finish time, obviously it's not going to work. So the system checks for that. So there's certain things in there that can give value to show a trainer what type of times they're looking at as far as their search times are concerned. But a lot of handlers prefer to not use that, which I try to advise against for specifically the reason that you're talking about. They've got to look past just the initial time that it's taken to put it into the system. It's important that they understand what their dogs are doing. And if they're always in there, every search is under 2 minutes, that's going to show up real quick with the type of record keeping that the system does. And so very quickly, an educated trainer is going to look at that and say, hey, we need to expand our training out here a little bit. We need to do a little bit more with what we're doing to get these dogs on tap with longer searches, and so that the searches are more varied. And that's, to me, that's very important.
Absolutely. Again, these keeping records helps you from falling into those ruts like you were just talking about.
Correct.
Because we're creatures of habit. We can't help but do some of these things that we're doing. And before we know it, the dog, who's an expert at many aspects about us, about reading us, all of these things, and without records, some type of oversight, you can get your trainer to help you out and friends to call out certain things. But when you see things in black and white, or even easier these days, when those numbers flash on the screen, you're like, holy cow, it's been a long time since I've done this particular training odor, or how long have I done since I've done a blank, all these different things that we talked about. Records are crucial for that information.
Absolutely.
I love the fact that you're seeing an uptick in the SAR community using records. And I guess since we're on that subject, let some of the SAR community know, because we got a pretty good following of those that listen to the podcast. What is it that you have that you in your system that is very helpful for those in the SAR community, or what have you seen, from the feedback that you've gotten in regards to those that use it already? What have they really liked? What's the benefit for them? Because again, most think of the program as a law enforcement type of software, but like I know, I've used CATS and been a part of your system since, like you said, when you first started it, the first agency I worked with, we used it. But again, there's many, it's new to them. So talk about it for the SAR community, what CATS has done for them and what you've got, the feedback you've gotten.
Always positive. We've even had input from some of the SAR teams of things that they want to see. And then when we teach them a little bit more about the system, they find out that in most cases, it's already there for them. Yeah. So they're using it for searches, area searches. They're using it for their tracking. One of the things that there's going to be some improvements in the system, something that's going to be coming out with right now, you can bring in GPS from virtually any device. If you can export, you can import it into CATS, and we're in the process of building something special that's going to go along with CATS directly from phones as time progresses here. But the thing with the search and rescue teams is that what they like about it is that they can, when they first come into the system, they can, if they pick up the SAR template, a lot of that is already pre-prepped for them, but they can also, some of them are doing HRD work. So when they're doing human remains, and it's a little bit different from what the norm is, we've got, the typical trackers and so on and so forth. What they really appreciate about the system is the fact that they can customize it to themselves. Anything that's law enforcement or that they don't use can be removed from every table in the system. Every table in the system is totally customizable to the end user, whether it be law enforcement, search and rescue, or whatever. So the SAR teams come in wondering if it really works for them, and then very quickly find out that it's very malleable and that they've got the ability to change it to exactly whatever it is that they're doing in their deployments.
Now, this has been a while since I played with this part or seen a change. Do you, for training, can you, now that we're seeing video used, obviously video's been used in law enforcement on the deployment side a lot more in the past, let's say 5 years.
Yes.
How about training? If whether you be search and rescue, law enforcement, whatever, are you able to upload the videos from training into your records for training? Okay.
The answer to this is yes and no. So, and there's a reason, Cameron. And first of all, yes, you can. We've developed the system so that you can. If we wanted to turn it on, we could turn it on. And the reason why we've done that is because we have the system deployed with some government agencies where they're using that aspect. So it's developed for that particular agency. Okay. So it's in the system. We just haven't got it turned on for civilian law enforcement or for search and rescue. Now, the reason why is because, quite frankly, when they do an upload to the system, what happens is that it expands the amount of space that the system needs to be able to store. That costs more money, which in turn we've got to increase the amount that we're charging for it. So right now, with law enforcement being our largest client base, being law enforcement, they are storing on the system that comes with the body cam. They don't really have a need for it. So we've never implemented in the system for law enforcement. They really just don't need it. However, with search and rescue, we may end up having to do that as time progresses if they are willing to pay what it costs to be able to do those uploads. That's the only thing that is preventing us from turning it on, simply because I don't want to have to charge more money than what we're already charging. So it's a balancing act. So again, and that's why the yes and no. Yes, we can do it. Yes, we've actually got it active on some systems, but those are for people that are hosting it on their own. Which is a very expensive endeavor. That's why it's more cost effective to just use the system that's up and running now, but it doesn't offer that ability at this point in time.
It'll be interesting to see, as we've seen, like we talked about earlier, detection changing and technology and science and all of these things that have come into it. I'll be curious to see if the next evolution in record keeping, just like it is on deployments, will start to include video of the teams in training. Now, the difference, I think, would be, law enforcement more than likely isn't going to, that's a catch-22. I don't know. I was going to say that they probably wouldn't necessarily put their body camera on to record a training, but maybe they would. But then there's also the ability for the trainer to film from a different point of view, which would be something like a GoPro or your phone or things like that. Now, obviously, in law enforcement, they stay away from using their personal phones for anything related to work because of the legal aspects and concerns. But with that said, I'm just throwing it out there as I wouldn't be shocked if in X amount of years, recording of K9 teams in training becomes more standardized, as that's something that has to be in records.
Okay, so that has been brought up, and it's something that we've dealt with extensively as a company. And we were at the point, once we got the video done, it was ready to be implemented. I basically put it out there to those that are working the streets. What do you think about turning this aspect on? Would you use it? And the answer was emphatically no.
I know, they were freaked out. I remember seeing that.
Oh yeah. And they did not want it. And the reason why they didn't want it is, well, what happens if the dog doesn't do good on bite training? He doesn't come off a bite. You know what? I understand that. However, it should be logged anyway. You should be writing that information down anyway. It's the failure should be logged, and then the correction, and you should be able to see it. So the good stuff comes along with the bad stuff. But they're very, very concerned about that. And I understand that. I get that. So at this point in time, we haven't offered that option. Again, more due to cost involved. That it's hard enough now to get agencies to pay for it. And I can tell you, whether it be our system or somebody else's system, it's minimal what they're paying for what they're getting.
Sure. Oh, no, I know.
It really is. And it's been a struggle to be able to keep things going with all the stuff that happens behind the scenes. Even with some of the other big companies that are competitors of ours, I know darn well that they've had to work hard to keep their pricing down so that guys can use the system, because programming is extremely expensive, and so is hosting. It's very, very expensive. And that's one of the biggest things for me anyway, has been trying to keep it. And we're probably we're not the highest, but we're one of the higher cost systems that are out there. But there's a lot of stuff that happens behind the scenes that costs us that money, that benefits the user, but it's not physically able to be seen as they're using it. So a lot of it is just a balancing act and trying to figure out what's best.
And on the video thing, when it comes to training, I totally understand the concern. I would be concerned as well on the aspect of interpretation of what is seen in a video.
Correct.
Because obviously, many things that are seen can be easily explained and understood by the handler and the trainer, those involved in the dog world. Go, oh yeah, that's what that means. But the media, the public, and whatever, if they saw something, whatever it is, they may not understand why that's occurring, whatever it is. We'll keep a detection just because of the podcast, and also it's an easier thing to sometimes explain. Well, why did the dog go by the odor first, then work the room and then came back? And, how come it just didn't, when it, if the odor was right there or the substance was right there, how come it didn't immediately? And, we can explain these things, and these things are usually sometimes documented. They should be documented in the records that the airflow was going this way and temperatures and blah, blah, blah. But a layman watching it, if you're in court or whatever, it does require a level of explanation, understanding of those that are watching it. And we know, good and bad, a picture/video is worth 1,000 words. And the interpretation or the point of view can make a very big difference on how it's understood. So I very much get the concern, hands down. But it's funny, with that said, back when I was a cop, and this was going to be in the early 2000s, I had a lot of the old school guys who I learned from hated the in-car cameras. They hated the body microphones. We don't, a lot of the same important discussions that we're having now about training.
Same arguments.
They had the same arguments then. And you know what? The system changed. So, it'll be interesting to see. I guess I'm, kind of just getting forward thinking here, going, I won't be shocked. I mean, again, me and you sit on these boards when it comes to standards and things like that, where I just wouldn't be shocked if maybe it starts with certifications. That could be one area where they want to see the certification
on video.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not to certify via video, but the certification that was witnessed by whatever evaluator and so forth on video. And it's funny that you were having that conversation, because I've been a certifying official for a number of different organizations for some years now. And the more I do it recently, I kind of want a body camera, not only for what I saw, but for the discussions about what occurred. Like, why was this okay? Or why did this team, how did this get called as an alert and that kind of stuff?
Video, sorry, Cameron, but video is an invaluable training aid.
Absolutely.
To be able to go back and analyze after a training session what you've done when you're sitting on from the outside and looking at what you and your dog did, it's an invaluable training aid. So there is benefit.
All of our students that go through our school here, every day ends in a video debrief of everybody. So the cool thing is every handler is videoed. Then at the end of the day, we sit down and every handler in the group watches all the other handlers' videos, and we talk about what we saw and what happened. And then our point of view as a trainer, and then the point of view as handlers who then are for the first time seeing this other team work. All of that has been super valuable. Every handler, hands down, has said it really helped them improve their handling skills going over that. So, as we're going down a wormhole here a little bit, I just think, this conversation, I hope, kind of, puts a light bulb on for some that, hey, we might need to make sure if this were to happen during our time in K9, we're ready to do it and to be forward thinking enough and prepared that it's not going to like freak you out when all of a sudden something comes up and then it's agency X that from now on has to, videotape all their asserts, or a certification authority, whoever they are, says, you know what, the use of cameras is so easy these days. Every evaluator will be wearing a GoPro type or body camera to record the interaction of the certification and what occurred, or stationary cameras are placed within the search areas to document as a, another set of eyes as to what occurred. What's kind of funny is, as I say this, even NYPD, they film their handler tryouts. They film a lot of the training, and they do it for two reasons. One, union requirement, because if people are trying out for K9 and there was an argument about something, they have the ability to say, here's what happened. Just like the body cameras on actual deployments. So I just see something very similar to pay attention to in at least is I have a feeling it's going to start certification, and then unless some weird thing happens legally, and maybe it starts in the patrol world first. Maybe the bite dog programs are required to film more of their training and training techniques or something along these lines. Who knows?
Well, that was the community that went against it the most as far as the idea is concerned, right?
Yeah.
And again, I can understand why, but it's interesting, Cameron, when I look and I deal with people all the time on this. Excuse me. And it's a sore point with me because I look at the capability and the equipment and the things that we've got available to us for training. And right now, I don't think there's been any better time in the history of police canine with better trainers than what we have out there right now. And yet we seem to have a lot of problems on the road, especially with the bite dogs, right? Yeah. And so the question is why? Is it because of lack of training? I don't think so. I think the training ability is there, but a lot of it depends on who you go to for training and what their priorities are. And when the use of a police dog back in the day was mostly tracking, and every once in a while you got a bite. Yeah. Even today, the bite ratio, when I took stats across the nation in preparation for my last book, I wanted to know what the bite ratios were. So I got it in the multiple demographics. But I put the information in. But one of the ones that stood out to me is that it was, I think, nationwide, it was like, I can't even remember now. I think it was around 8%, 8.3% was the dog bite ratio nationwide. Yeah. With everything combined together. Mm-hmm. So if your bite ratio is 8.3% nationwide, why is that tracking or using the dog's olfactory capabilities in any format, especially for cross-trained dogs and so on and so forth, why is it that we spend a significant portion of our training night, maybe 60% training bite work, mm-hmm. and maybe 10% on narcotics kind of routine, and maybe another 30% on building searches and tracking and so on and so forth. Yeah. When the dogs are utilized more for their olfactory capability, why do we focus so much on the bite work? And it's always about the bite work. It's not about necessarily the how clean the dogs are or how to recall the dog, scenario-based training and so on and so forth. So a lot of it has to do with what the priorities are in training as well, and what you record and how you record it.
Yeah. I mean, I know the majority of that answer comes to two things. One, high liability training. So that's why it gets a lot of attention. And two, that's the fun stuff.
That's exactly right. Number two, especially.
Yeah. Yeah. Number two, especially. And also, and what I found when you asked that question about handlers, in the videos, and do they want to, I had to die laughing in the sense that they were so against sharing the videos of training. Yep. Yet half of these suckers put their stuff all over social media.
Social media, yes.
They have, like, you just need to go to their social media profile and go watch half the stuff anyway. Yeah. So in one case, they put it on blast everywhere. Look at my dog doing this and the bites and the blah, 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 and all of this stuff. And then if not necessarily them directly doing it, they let the seminar groups or the other people, the trainers, share it like nonstop.
Correct.
Like all the time. But yet, all of a sudden, when the question's pointedly asked, hey, what do you think about? Oh, hell no. And then you go to that person's profile and they got 200 videos of their dog doing bite work.
We never got I don't think we got a single positive on those saying, hey, we've got it ready to go in cat. That's why I asked, because we completed in cats for the client that we were working with. We could implement it in the current system. Yeah. And it was like a big no. So I said, okay.
I know. Yeah. You don't know how badly I want to get on there and go, all you bitches have your social media plastered with bite work. Not everybody, but a lot of them, a lot of people that are saying, no, hold on a second. Here's 10 videos from your social media feed showing bite work. How in a sense is it? There is differences, but how can you say no and then go do this? If you truly were sticking to the ethos of no video, so that was just a funny thing that went there in that one.
It was interesting. I was surprised.
Yeah. I mean, I knew it was going to be a point there where people were highly concerned, and most would say no. But yeah, it was like not even a little bit of a yes. It was absolutely freaking no way.
Yeah, exactly.
So, now in the record keeping, as record keeping is growing, and you talked about people using it more from other types of disciplines, have you, because with the growth of the sport detection community, who are really highly interested in, I mean, I come across people all the time that are really interested in record keeping for their sport dogs. Have you considered that? What's your thoughts on, opening or going into that market for offering those people who want to keep track of their dogs in detection?
You know what? It's already there. I mean, the system is already built for that. And
Yep.
again, like SAR teams, they can customize it for whatever they want. So it's open and available to them should they want to do that. And we've got bed bug detection in the system,
Yep.
but they don't come out. We don't implement. It wasn't implemented as a bed bug detection type
Yeah.
system, but they come in and customize what they want. We've got HRD, we've got electronics in the system for cell phones and that type of thing. We've got the narcotics, but the explosives, all those kinds of things. They're just setting it up for themselves the way that they want it. So it would be totally open to them. It's simply an area that hasn't yet reached out to us. Or maybe because they haven't been made aware of it that much.
Yeah,
I really don't know.
I think this might cause some help, but and here's my point of view from using cats. I would say, knowing the sport community that I do, and then my trainer Natalie being much more heavily involved as both a handler and trainer in it, I would say, knowing cats, you could really just have a stripped down version of what you currently have. Like you said, because the infrastructure for everything they want is there. They just don't, I know, let's just say your demographic for using it is going to be probably, majority is going to be over 40. And out of that, there's probably, let's just say 50 and up. So, some are tech savvy, some aren't, because obviously our generation, I'm pushing 50 now. So, technology came around when we were, like you talked about, this came out while we were, in our 20s or 30s.
Yeah.
So where we have a vast majority in the sport world that are above that 45 demographic, it just needs to be super user friendly. Very basic in the sense of, here's an easy way to input what I put out in training. Here's, here's what I search, here's what I put out, here's my search time. And then, like you said, customizable, the notes like you already have. I mean, so much of what's in cats is already there for this. You could just end up removing a significant portion of all the other stuff, or some of those little hoops that you create for the professionals to have to make sure that they click this and click that. You have that, like, always, you can never, what was the word I used to use for your program? You can never, you never say okay enough, or never click okay enough. Always click okay before you move on.
Right.
So the some of that stuff wouldn't have to happen in the sport world. They wouldn't have to have as much redundancy.
No.
Because
the thing about it is that we've designed the system so you don't have to pay for the whole system either.
Yeah.
So it's starting to get into an advertisement here. We don't, I don't want to get too far into it that way, but basically there's different tiers with it.
Yeah.
And so you've got your premium package, which anybody with a bite dog, as far as law enforcement is concerned, that's what they should be looking at. People that have detection only and are not doing bite work at all, so they don't have to collect the bite stats and bite demographics and protect themselves that way, can go a lot of times, if it's strictly detection only and they don't want to do some other stats, they can get away with a light package. But for people like that are doing what you're talking about now, just people in the sport world, all they need is a training package. And so the price comes down each time, and you just turn on what you need and it's done. So it's basically already there. It's just a matter of them logging in and going to work.
Yeah. Or maybe me and you we have to sit down and play with this a little bit and turn this idea into potentially a reality for you and for the community. Because like I said, as I've gone around and done more in the sport world myself, when we do these CSDT classes, it's a lot of the trainers want this information. And what's really helpful about a record keeping program, let's say I'm the trainer, I can set training up and then immediately share it to those who showed up, which is a great thing.
Yes.
That's super helpful because then you don't have to have like everybody redo the same things I wrote down or what have you. And don't get me wrong, there's plenty of people that are just happy with a notebook and a pencil. Cool, no problem.
Yeah.
But it's not as easy with that notebook and pencil to really know how many hides have you had, how long has it been, how many exteriors, interiors, all the things that I know sport people keep track of, just to improve their skill set. So, sport people, if you're listening, if you made it this far into the podcast, hey, you never know. We might come up with something, in the near future, because I know I see the demand for it, and you have the software and the ability to pull this off. And like I said, I would say it's like you said, if not 90% there, it's easily 80-85% there.
Oh yeah, it's there in a heartbeat. It's just a matter of a click of a button.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, if you're the trainer, you also have the ability to go in and make notes on their files as well.
Yes.
If you want to give them hits and tips as to what to do to correct a problem, you can log in there and do it. It's a breeze to work in that regard.
That would be so helpful just for me as I travel, because I do so many traveling seminars. If these people had used some of these things, and as I set up training, I just make those notes from my iPad and boom, and off it goes to their records.
Correct.
Oh man, that's just a huge help. And if you're obviously someone who trains numerous different types of clients, it's super helpful because time is our commodity at the end of the day. And if I can spend my time more productively versus going, from one person to the next person and just redoing the same thing versus going hit send, everybody gets it at once, has their notes in there. That's fantastic. That's a huge help. So, and I know the community loves that too, because they seek feedback very eagerly in the sport world. They want that coaching, they want that information, they want to review it later on, see how they can improve. And then next time I see them, oh, look at that, look what it got better from our last time. And that's another one that would obviously highly love using the videos. They would upload videos probably galore.
I might have to get another server if it gets to that point.
I'm telling you, just because a vast majority, when I do anything in the sport world, there's at least 3 or 4 cameras going. If somebody usually following a friend's following them, if they don't already have a GoPro on them. It's funny, I'm about ready to shoot a video later today because I talked about this new camera that I use. It's called the DJI Action 2. It's the same thing as those little small GoPros that used to be little cube, but the Action 2 it's just an improved version of it. But it literally, you put a lanyard around your neck, it goes under your shirt. The camera just magnetically snaps to your shirt, and it's 1 inch by 1 inch square. So it's barely noticeable. It's 4K. It's got all these steady features to it, but it's so easy to use. And I'm like, man, if this keeps becoming even easier, dog handlers galore can record everything.
Yeah.
You're going to turn into the sport world into a bunch of cops in the sense that everybody's got a camera on them all the time.
Right.
So, because it is, and
potential.
What's that?
It has the potential to get there. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
And I joke around. I hated doing videos for years, and then all of a sudden now I video everything. So go figure. So I know if this, old dog can learn a new trick, I'm sure others will probably start to break. Because again, the easier it is to use, the more we're going to use it. So
right.
The last question I have is in relation. This is more of a selfish one. So I'm getting more into forensic type of canine detection, which is already very popular. I won't say popular is the right word, but it's used a whole lot more in Europe than it is here. I'm assuming, like you said, because cats is very customizable, doing things like blood detection, semen detection. Like you said, obviously the electronics is already there. I'm assuming, do you have any arson handlers that are doing this?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. Like I say, it's the whole system is totally customizable. If you want blood detection, you put it in.
Yeah.
And it comes up on the reports the way that you've got it in there. Virtually, I'm not sure how many different tables. I think there's over 60 tables in the system. Wow. And out of those 60 tables, I think there's 58 that are totally customizable. And most of them are customizable on the fly. If you're a single user, you're in there. You don't even have to leave the page that you're on. If there's something that you need in your list and it's not there, you can add it on the fly and you just carry on. You don't have to leave the page and go into the back office in order to add it. So it doesn't matter what it is that you want to track, the system will take it.
And what's cool is you are also incorporating this into research, like we talked about with one of our common friends, the research world is starting to tap into utilizing cats to upload data from research. So that way we have even more information in regards to, whether it be the types of equipment we're using that collects the data for us. Like we were talking about earlier was the Smart Wheel by Simon and the smart boxes, even though they don't have a name yet, the olfactometers actually that Dr. Hall uses. All of these things automatically collect data, and to have basically your system, a records keeping system that this information can dump right to, is another utilization outside the typical law enforcement way of data collection that's super helpful for all of us later on down the line in detection.
Correct. It's in this case, it's not something that I'm at liberty to speak about,
Sure.
but it's very refined. It would have very refined use, but there's really no limits to what can be done and from the data gathered and the information that it can output for you. There really is no limit.
Well, I want to, so, how do people find you? How do they get a hold of you? If they want to get cats, tell us where to go.
So go to Cats Platinum. It's KATS Platinum.com. We'll get you some background on what the system is there. There's buttons on there if they want to try out the system. It's a free trial for 45 days. If there's any questions, it's just a matter of picking up the phone and calling me. Our phone number is on the website, as well as if you're in the system, it's always in the bottom left-hand corner of the system, so you can get in touch with me. My email is RSEDEN, Romeo Sierra Echo Delta Echo November, at police and the letter K, the number 9.com. And I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that anybody might have.
I can tell you firsthand, and I know this, even not just being a friend with Bob, he responds so fast and responds no matter what to anybody that reaches out. I've had different people always tell me, oh yeah, I had a question. I shot a message to Bob and he replied to me. I've had cops from all over go, yeah, I just talked to Bob the other day. I had a question about my record keeping and he was right there, walked me through it. And I've used you in that way. I've had you get online before with friends and companies that were looking at you utilizing cats. I can easily say in this day and age, Bob is somebody very, easy to get a hold of. He's very timely in getting back to you. And that isn't easily said these days. So thank you for always being able to help us out and get better in our data collection as dog people, and just being a good steward for all of us in the canine world through your books and your seminars and everything you've done.
Oh, I appreciate it, Cameron. Thank you very much. It's been a long ride, and I've enjoyed it very much. And the best part about it is I'm still learning, and that's bonus.
Absolutely. And like I said, I can't thank you enough for coming on the podcast. And, thank you to everybody who's been listening and watching today's podcast. And thank you from K9s Talking Scents, where it's okay to be nosy.